Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for this very important presentation on the housing situation in Maricopa County. We are very fortunate to have great speakers and a great team that is organizing and bringing all of this information together. My name is Penny Sharon. I am the president of the League of Women Voters of Metro Phoenix, the local league. I also serve as the president-elect for the state league. I am honored to be able to launch this meeting today and this presentation. To put some things in perspective for everybody, the event is being recorded, and we will make available the recording both to the people who've registered and to all our members in our regular monthly newsletter, and it'll also be available on our YouTube channel. A couple of norms. We have a host and a co-host. Our meeting is set up so that questions that you might wish to ask, please send them primarily to Laura Hudson, our co-host, who will then do the needful to move them forward. If you feel the need to ask a question, I'm happy to take that, but the expertise really is in Betsy and Laura and our speakers. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization. We are a political organization. We neither support nor oppose any candidates or political parties. Our ability to advocate for our communities, to educate our voters, is rooted in the work that we do in studying issues that matter to our communities. We refer to those as public policy positions. We do not advocate or speak out unless the league has arrived at a public policy position. Public policy positions are adopted by membership at large. It's the membership's voices that determine what is the public policy position of the league. So it is not determined by a small group of people. However, the work that goes in, the in-depth, incredible work that goes in to arrive at those positions happens at the national level. At the national level, our policy positions are documented in the impact on issues, a document well worth reading for everybody in this meeting and otherwise. At the state level, we also adopt policies at the state level. The League of Women Voters of Arizona has policies, and you may read those on the website. And the local leagues either work through policies that they adopt or through policies of the national and the state league. I want to share with you all how incredibly fortunate MP has to have a team that has taken on developing a public policy position for League of Women Voters of Metro Phoenix, focused on the issues that impact Maricopa County. That is the local league service area. We're also incredibly fortunate to have Betsy Flatten. I don't think she ran away fast enough, but agreed to chair the group. And she has really advanced the work on this. Today's event is a series of education events to prepare our members in the community to understand the issue so they may weigh in on whatever is arrived at as the final position that we take on housing. And the goal is to develop a rather comprehensive position that will allow us to advocate for our communities. With that being said, I want to thank you all for giving up your Wednesday evening to be with us, and I will turn it over to Betsy. Betsy, thank you for doing this really important work.
Well, thank you. And it's an exciting topic for me. It's something I've been interested in since the 1970s and before. And I have a wonderful team. Leslie Hansen, Laura Hudson, Rivko Knox, Pike Oliver, and they have just really taken on different parts of the project and writing, researching, and I feel very lucky. So now onward to our speakers tonight, about whom I also feel very lucky. And I wanted to mention, and I mentioned to the speakers already, that the Arizona Republic was very timely and has just started a series of articles about the issue of NIMBYism, not in my backyard. And it just fit perfectly with what's going on today. But if you haven't seen the Arizona Republic articles, be sure and look for those. And Catherine Rieger is the author. So first of all, I'll introduce Amy St. Peter. And Amy is the Deputy Executive Director of the Maricopa Association of Governments. And that is our regional planning agency for Greater Phoenix. And so that pulls together all of our governments in the metro area and works with them. And one of the areas they've been working on is housing and homelessness. And Amy has her Master's of Public Administration from ASU. Prior to that, she got her BA in Sociology and Writing, and there is a story about that, from Loyola College. And is that in Boston? Am I correct?
There's a few of them. I went to the one in Baltimore.
Baltimore, that's right. You at some point you were in Boston. I remember that. Okay. Anyway, Amy's background is in human services, in direct care to start with, to policy initiatives and collaborations and organizing and all of that. And she worked at one point with Pathways Home, which is a regional homelessness plan for local and tribal governments. Another example is she worked with, or maybe still is, Age Friendly Arizona to connect older adults like me with the community. And as I said, her expertise is in program development, organization, homelessness, aging, smart regions, human services, transportation, and civil rights. And so she is a coordinator, a planner, an organizer, and a collaborator. And so just briefly, I wanted to touch on how Amy got here, because she came from the East. She was born in Connecticut. Her husband is from Vermont. And now she's spent 30 years in Arizona, and she's not all that old. So she needed to find a place. She said where she had been living, the sun was missing. And I noticed that too, why I'm out here. And 2 years in a row, she lived in a remote area in Virginia, a holler. And she had a kerosene heater and no electricity when the weather did not cooperate, no water. And so she had tons of snow. She had to break the ice for water. And so she moved to Arizona. Amy wanted to be, from childhood, she wanted to be a journalist. She was 100% certain. But in college, she couldn't get into the course she needed for photography. And so she took a sociology course. And that started her down a whole new track where she can combine writing and sociology. And she also had an experience where she was mugged, and she really was trying to figure out how that kind of situation existed, understanding the people. And sociology helped her with that. And she said it turns out that writing and sociology have been invaluable for her job. And she also, I asked her a couple of other things, her interests, and she said hiking, kayaking, and then the cultural side. Yeah, that's the outdoor side. The cultural side, opera, theater, and symphony. So she's pretty much covered the whole ballpark. And then I asked her, what about a favorite food or something? Well, her heritage has some, I don't know if it's all, but her mother has Italian, grandmother. And so she loves Italian comfort food, cannoli and lasagna, which were part of what her grandmother fixed for Christmas. Is that right? Okay. So thank you, Amy. And you can share more things with us in just a minute, but I was going to also introduce Allison, I don't think Rivko was able to get on. Let me just quick sense. The person that was going to introduce Allison has had trouble connecting. And so Allison is going to help us meet her. And so, Allison, could you share a little bit about your background, what you do, and then how did you get here and what things do you like?
All right, I'll see if I can cover all of that. I think I can do this. I was not born in Arizona, but my family moved here when I was a pretty small kiddo. I was 11 when I moved here, so I've spent most of my life as an Arizona resident, and I've lived in Phoenix, I've lived in Scottsdale, I've lived in Chandler, I've lived in Yuma. I have lived in Tucson. So I have lived in a number of different places, but I always seem to come sort of back to back to this area. Sort of started here as a kiddo. I went to high school here. So I have I have a huge investment in Arizona just as an Arizona resident. And so, my sort of educational background is I actually went to University of Arizona as an undergraduate and got my degree in psychology. And then I got a master's degree and a PhD in social psychology from the University of Missouri in Columbia. So I went back to the Midwest, tried that out for 6 years, and then I also got cold and came home. I came back to the Phoenix area, and I got a master's in legal studies at Arizona State University. And my career has mostly been in research. I started out actually as an analyst at the Maricopa County Adult Probation Department. And I did a lot of research and analytics for that department for a number of years before I came to ASU. And for a while, I was also teaching at ASU, and then I eventually came over to ASU to do some research and evaluation work. And I've been at Morrison Institute. I'm now the director of research at Morrison Institute, and I've been the director at Morrison Institute since 2020. So I managed to start my my career at Morrison Institute right as everything was shutting down for COVID. And so it's a very memorable day because it was the last day I was allowed in the building to get my laptop before the whole campus was shut down and most places were shutting down. Let's see, what else about me? What were your other questions? What do I like to do, or
what do you like to do? Any special food thing, and then we'll go on to that.
Okay, yes. So I like being outdoors a lot. I love skiing, which is sort of maybe funny for someone who lives here in Phoenix, but I do a lot of travel to go skiing because I don't like being cold, but I do like winter sports. And so the best part of winter sports is when you can go visit, ski, and then you can come home and not have to shovel snow. So I enjoy skiing and I enjoy hiking, and I have a son who's 11, and we like to go do lots of fun things together. I try to get him outside a lot too because I love being outdoors. And then so that's pretty much me. I live near South Mountain, so I do some mountain biking on South Mountain and some hiking and stuff too. So
that's great. Well, thank you. And I love the Morrison Institute. I have never been on campus, but there is wonderful information about housing from the Morrison Institute. So for our audience, if you have not checked out the articles there, I think you can just Google Morrison Institute housing study, and
yes.
You'll come up with wonderful work. Okay, well, I think we're going to start with Amy with her presentation and then go to Alison. Is that correct?
I think I'm gonna start and then
Okay.
Never
Amy.
mind. So that's okay. We'll make it
We'll start with Alison.
For the transition. All right.
And then learn a lot from both of our speakers.
Okay,
Thank you.
so I'm going to share my screen because I just have some slides to kind of help, kind of walk through. Thank you, for working with the introduction. And today, what I'm planning to do is just highlight some research that really focuses on challenges that developers face when building housing in Arizona. But let's see. If I can switch. Okay, but first, I would like to provide a little context. And so I'm going to provide just a little bit of overview about some of the housing research that we've done. And it is available on our website. You can definitely Google Morrison Institute Housing Research. But I want to talk just a little bit about the research that we have done and kind of put it all into context. So the Arizona Community Foundation funded a large body of housing policy research on several aspects of the Arizona housing crisis. The funding really started in kind of late 2020, and we were publishing studies through the beginning of 2023. And so all of this has really continued, as you noted. But we first started with the history of housing policy in Arizona. The idea here was that we would be able to you can use the past to contextualize the present. And this involved writing 2 pieces. One was a brief history of housing policy and discrimination in Arizona, and also creating a story map that highlighted the history of settlement and housing in 6 Arizona counties. We also zoomed out and looked at the structural level to take a look at current legal barriers to building and maintaining affordable housing. And then we also spoke with housing experts across the state, and we conducted focus groups in 6 counties with residents who had applied for eviction relief assistance during COVID. So our goal here was to be able to sort of gather perspectives from people experiencing housing insecurity to better understand the challenges and opportunities for housing across 6 counties. And these 6 counties did include Yavapai, Coconino, Maricopa, Pima, Cochise, and Yuma. And then the final piece was we interviewed development professionals across the state to understand sort of the hurdles that they have to overcome in order to fund and build housing in Arizona. So I'm going to concentrate on that last piece there in our series to talk a little bit about kind of the challenges around development. Oops, went wrong way. So to understand these challenges, we interviewed 15 housing practitioners who worked with a variety of housing types in both urban and rural areas. And they worked for development companies, nonprofits, cities, or as consultants. And so as I go through these challenges and these potential solutions, just keep in mind that these were from the perspectives of the developers that we talked to. So the first challenge is around financing. As it turns out, land and construction and labor costs have continued to rise due to inflation and supply chain issues, and developers were struggling to finance their projects. And developers often must compete with each other over land, and larger developers can often pay more, leaving smaller organizations at a disadvantage. Furthermore, smaller projects were also impacted by construction costs because they're not necessarily receiving the same benefits of economies of scale. And smaller projects can also struggle to find general contractors or other workers who want to work on those larger projects. Furthermore, rural areas struggle with construction costs and contracting issues because there's a greater need for low density housing like single family homes. They have to bring in workers from other areas who need to travel over long periods of time. Construction costs are the same in both urban and rural areas, but there are lower median incomes and rents in rural areas often leaves developers having to find more funding to fill gaps. So as developers struggle with the rising costs, they seek additional ways to cover them. So one way to do this is through the low housing income tax credit applications. And just to give you a perspective, there were 33 applications that were filed in 2021, but only 16 were able to be funded. They also rely heavily on federal and local sources of funding. and often have many layers of funding. One developer also noted that there's not as many subsidies for specific buyers, such as those making 80 to 120% of the area median income. And having all these layers of funding also means they have to comply with each of those sources' funding and reporting requirements, which can be quite cumbersome. So developers said that there is an appetite from investors for the low income housing tax credits, and it would be beneficial to expand the number of credits available. Many of you may already know this, but the state established its own affordable housing tax credit program in 2021, which provides $4 million annually for 4 years and can be leveraged up to $160 million in the state for affordable housing. Ultimately, increasing federal LIHTC lies with Congress, but the Biden administration has emphasized that expanding and strengthening the LIHTC program is a priority. The second element on here is the general obligation bonds, and you may also be familiar with this program. These are government issued and repaid from state or local general funds or dedicated tax, and they can be used to fund housing projects, and their exemption from federal and sometimes local taxes is beneficial. These require a public vote, and as many of you who may have voted in the last election may have noticed, the $500 million GO bond program that Phoenix just passed this last November. $65 million of those bonds are proposed for affordable housing projects or financing support. An example of GO bonds or general obligation bonds working in other areas includes in 2016, voters in Portland, Oregon approved the city's first housing bond, which dedicated $258.4 million to create 1,300 permanently affordable homes. And so that worked well for that community. The next solution that was imparted was around impact fee waivers. So impact fees are development fees that occur during the construction process and exist as a way to raise revenue to cover the cost of expanding infrastructure that results from new development. Local governments can give fee waivers or reductions to incentivize housing development. Affordability requirements can be added as a condition of that waiver. And an example is that Tucson offers impact fee waivers for affordable housing projects already, and projects with waivers can score higher on LIHTC applications. Property tax abatement or exemption is similar but a little bit different. So abatements reduce the total amount of tax owed, while exemptions adjust the value of the property, which is then used to calculate the amount of tax owed. So the length of time for the abatement or exemption may last different lengths depending on what the city hopes to encourage. Generally, it's usually long enough to incentivize developers while also not hindering the tax revenue collected by the city for other needs. Similar to impact fees, a project must also typically meet affordability requirements to be eligible for abatements and exemptions. In Arizona, nonprofit developers can legally qualify for property tax exemption. This exemption does not apply for for-profit developers, many of whom are producing much of the state's affordable housing. An example elsewhere is in Washington, D.C., developers can receive a 10-year abatement equivalent to 75% of the difference between the property tax owed before and after the development. At least 5% of the project units, though, must be reserved for low-income households, and an additional 10% of units must be reserved for households earning up to 60% of the area median income. And this affordability of the units must be maintained for 20 years. So that's one example of a program like that. The second challenge that was brought up by developers is around zoning and development standards. If you look at any given municipality in Arizona, you'll find that most have about 50% of their land zoned for single family use. This is actually, this picture is actually a zoning map for the Prescott area. But this is not to pick on Prescott. They all look like this. All of the yellow is for single family homes. And so if the idea is to create more affordable housing, or housing that is more affordable, then requiring the housing to be a little smaller and potentially more dense requires them to have to rezone for multifamily use. And this means that developers have to fill out initial applications, notify neighborhoods, go through city and committee reviews and public hearings. The lack of multifamily land also means there's more competition and higher prices for the land that's already zoned as multifamily. So rezoning can be a lengthy process, and some developers noted that it can take up to 2 years or even longer to get approvals. For affordable housing, and this is, I'm using the word affordable housing as subsidized housing, which oftentimes is using LIHTC credits. This can put critical funding at risk and become very costly if developers need to hire land use attorneys and other experts. It also invites community pushback via public hearings, which I will actually talk about in Challenge 3 more thoroughly. But developers are required to meet certain development standards for their projects, such as parking minimums and design elements. And parking can be very expensive to build and add a lot of cost, which is difficult for affordable housing developers to manage without transferring those costs to the tenant. So to address zoning challenges, zoning code and development standards need to be more flexible to allow for high density housing or higher density housing. Now, higher density housing does not need to look like giant apartment buildings. It could be smaller scale, like accessory dwelling units or duplexes. And other places around the country have used various methods to refine zoning code. For example, in 2018, Minneapolis eliminated single-family zoning to increase the variety of housing options in low-density areas. For example, allowing duplexes in previously zoned single-family neighborhoods can be effective in areas like in the Phoenix area with high percentages of single-family zoning. Inclusionary zoning is used in over 1,000 jurisdictions in the country. This approach can be mandatory or voluntary, and it occurs by setting aside a certain percentage of units in new or rehabilitated projects for low to moderate income residents. Arizona is one of 7 states that prohibits mandatory inclusionary zoning. Finally, by right development is another strategy that would make multifamily housing allowable by right or without the need for additional approvals in predetermined locations and neighborhoods. This removes rezoning barriers and streamlines the development process. In 2021, Tucson adopted a change to its zoning code to allow for ADUs to be developed in residential areas. This makes it much easier to build because now people do not have to go through a special permitting process. A similar ADU allowance has been added to City of Tempe as well. But it's very new, and applications, I think, were only eligible in November of this year. So challenge 3 is around community pushback. Developers receive pushback, and this is some of the pieces that Betsy was talking about too, that you may have read in the paper this week, especially. But these developers that we talked to were actually almost a year ago, and we were seeing a lot of pushback, and they were saying that they get pushback on all housing projects of all types, but multifamily and affordable housing are particularly impacted. As I mentioned previously, pushback usually comes during the zoning or rezoning or variance seeking process. And people have fears about their property values, density, crime, traffic, and will even bluntly say that they don't want those kind of people in their neighborhoods. This type of pushback has led to many projects being delayed or modified or canceled. Some neighborhoods have well-organized HOAs that are prepared to attend meetings and push back, and they can also put pressure on council members who may privately support a project but feel they must adhere to community wishes. Now, solutions are a little tricky on this side because finding a clear solution to community pushback is difficult because it primarily deals with changing attitudes and perceptions. Developers shared that conducting community outreach and building relationships was very important early on in the project as a key to garnering community support. Part of this includes gathering support of community leaders and giving the community a chance to weigh in on design. And part of it is this outreach is also combating negative perceptions of who will be living in the housing. Some developers said that they showed people the income levels of their residents, which are often in the range of teachers or firefighters, or just similar to those who are already living in the community. Demonstrating the quality and the success of previous projects can also be a way to show community members what the project will be like. Relationships with governments and organizations can also be helpful. It gives developers better access to potential funding opportunities, and there's increased willingness from the government to find solutions if issues do arise. Finally, developers said that they wished to see more political will around creative housing solutions. And for example, having local governments develop more community land trusts to provide affordable homeownership opportunities. So this research, this last paper we did was published in 2023, has really allowed us to sort of parlay our experience and team up with researchers across multiple universities to apply for a large, a large HUD grant to create the Arizona Research Center for Housing Equity and Sustainability. And so I'm going to just tell you a little bit about this, and this will sort of set up what Amy will then start to talk about. This center was funded as part of the HUD's first Hispanic Serving Institutions grant to advance knowledge and evidence-based solutions related to housing challenges. The center is co-located at Arizona State's Morrison Institute for Public Policy and University of Arizona's Drockman Institute. And it includes researchers from our institutions across ASU and U of A, but also from Northern Arizona University and from the University of New Mexico. All four are Hispanic serving institutions. This center includes over 20 faculty and staff with expertise in housing, planning, policy, architecture, geographical sciences, political science, economics, and real estate. And our center partners with community groups. And the three partners that we really had the opportunity to start with in our actual proposal were Chicanos por la Causa, Southwest Fair Housing Council, and Home Matters to Arizona. And I, along with my co-director, Kenny Wong, have started meeting with community organizations and leaders to introduce the center and to assemble our advisory board, which will help inform the research and our center sustainment. But our researchers will work directly with community partners and stakeholders across Arizona and the Southwest. So the mission of this center is to become the hub for research addressing housing security, climate, and health for Arizona and the Southwest. The center aims to create connections between research and practice and values place-based research. So research that's done here in Arizona for Arizona that is community engaged, equitable, evidence-based, and solution-focused. We use arches as our sort of guiding metaphor because we believe that we'll be able to build capacity to create community engaged knowledge that generates solutions to challenges around housing security, climate, and health, and connecting the research across our partner institutions and across the Southwest. The arch also represents the center's interdisciplinary approach to addressing intersections among housing security, climate, and health. And we are here to support some of the strategic goals and objectives around equitable housing growth and production, to support Hispanic and underserved households, housing innovations for resilience in the arid Southwest, and healthy homes and aging communities. All of these relate to the 3 pillars of our that are listed here under housing security, climate, and health. And we are going to be doing 19 projects over the next 3 years. And findings will be communicated across the state with local and state decision makers, housing scholars, and of course the communities. And I will be leading a project in partnership with Arizona Home Matters related to the work that you're about to hear about, the Home is Where It All Starts campaign. So with that, I will turn it over to Amy St. Peter, and I'm happy to take questions at the end. Here, let me stop sharing.
Great. Thank you so much, Allison. That was fantastic. I'm really excited to be able to share this work with everyone. Are you able to see my screen okay? You should be seeing the PowerPoint. Oh, darn it. There you go. Can you see my screen okay?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much. So as Alison was just saying, there is a huge need across the entire region, across the country, really, to be able to provide more housing options in every community. And so it's not at any one particular price point necessarily, although most of the time we are seeing more of a need for those affordable rents and mortgages. But affordable, what makes a rent or mortgage affordable isn't just the housing cost, it's also the income. So we need to look at this really holistically because every community has that need. Not every community will answer that need in the same way. Communities, leaders need some flexibility to be able to respond to the preferences or priorities of their residents. And so it's really important to provide an array of choices and to not put barriers in place. And so what we're looking at right now is how do we increase acceptance of affordable rents and mortgages to give those community leaders support and being able to have a really constructive conversation, because there are concerns, there are priorities all around the table on this conversation, and we need to be able to talk with one another in a really constructive manner. And unfortunately, that doesn't always happen, and in some circles that doesn't even often happen. And so we need more of that across the entire board. So that's really that's what really drove the genesis of this campaign. But particularly as we're looking at not just what is a campaign, we need to look at why do we have this campaign. This is a picture of Claire. This is a picture of Claire with her daughter in front of their home. And they didn't always have this. Claire and her family experienced homelessness. They're out on the streets because they couldn't afford housing. So Claire was really fortunate because she was able to work with a local nonprofit. They helped her to get on her feet, to be able to earn more money, to increase her income so she could find an affordable rent or mortgage, in this case, a mortgage. And today, Claire is housed because of that assistance. But there are thousands of people throughout our region, throughout our state, who haven't had that opportunity yet. And they are experiencing homelessness, or they are struggling, and they are doubled up, and they are really in crisis because they lack the stability that an affordable rent or mortgage can provide. So with this campaign, we really do envision a future where everyone has access to affordable rents and mortgages. We're not just talking about doing things for people, we're talking about doing things with people so that they can be self-sufficient and stable, and they can give back to their community in a really positive way. And this is the reason why. We find that people are struggling with rent, particularly. Housing costs are increasing across the board. We see interest rates going up, for example, for home ownership, but particularly hard hit are the renters. And so we're seeing those rents increase significantly across the entire region. You can see every community has experienced some kind of rent increase, some communities more deeply than others. You can see those red dots where rent has increased more than 100% just in the past 4 years. And this hits some demographics harder than others. We find particularly for older adults living on a fixed income, they're literally choosing between, do I pay for this medication that I need to live, or do I pay my rent to give me a place to live? And it's a hard choice, and it's one that many people unfortunately are having to face in our communities. Our neighbors are struggling with this right now. So when we talk about affordable rents and mortgages, what is affordable? Affordable is paying no more than 30% of your income every single month just on housing costs. Severely cost burdened is paying more than 50% of your income every single month just on housing costs. So typically these are people who are more at risk for experiencing homelessness, because any kind of increase in costs, such as medical costs, a car repair, if they miss work because they're ill for a while, anything like that can tip them over the edge into experiencing homelessness, into losing their housing. And that really starts that downward spiral. Once you start falling down, that spiral is very, very difficult to be able to rebound and come back from that. Now, not everyone who's evicted experiences homelessness, but it puts people more at risk. It pushes people more to that edge, and that's not where we want them. And as I had mentioned just a moment before, 27% of multifamily renter households are severely cost burdened right now. And so we're finding that they're particularly hard hit. And so when we're designing different strategies and interventions, we need to have that in mind. And so again, when we're looking at affordable housing or affordable rents and mortgages, part of it is about the cost and part of it is about the salary. So this illustrates right now in our communities how much somebody has to earn every single year to be able to afford to buy a home, generally with a 6% interest rate, because that's what we're looking at right now, more generally, or to afford a 2-bedroom rent or a 1-bedroom rent at no more than 30% of their income every single month. And this is what we're finding. So if you ask anybody, do you want firefighters in your neighborhood? Do you want nurses, police officers, school teachers, construction workers? Generally, they're going to say yes. But unfortunately, when we start talking about us and them, which is what this conversation boils down to pretty quickly, when people are saying, I don't want them in my neighborhood, these are the people that they're talking about not wanting in their neighborhood, essentially. And maybe they don't consciously say, I don't want them in my neighborhood, but they can't find housing in their neighborhood. So unless we're providing affordable options, we're essentially telling people, no, we don't want you here. Or you can work here, but you can't live here. I don't want you as my neighbor. And that's not a message maybe that people consciously intend to send, but in essence, that's what we're saying when people can't afford to live in their communities. And you can see only registered nurses and police officers right now can afford a 2-bedroom rent or a 1-bedroom rent. They can't afford that home purchase. So we're pricing people out of the market and we're not giving them opportunities to live and work in the same neighborhood. So as a result, we're seeing evictions, and we're seeing evictions across the entire region. Again, more so in some areas than others. We find that 79% of evictions are happening in those low-income areas. It kind of makes sense. The housing costs and the incomes don't align. But what's really stark about this is when you compare us to the national average. Right now, 14% are heading towards eviction. And when you compare that to the national average of 8%, it's dramatic. We're almost twice the national average right now for evictions. And that means that people aren't stable. And if they're losing their housing, they may be also losing their jobs soon after that because they need that stability. It may mean that their children are no longer going to school or to the school that they've been used to and maybe where they were performing really well. So we're disrupting lives, and we're disrupting the social fabric of our communities when we have such high eviction rates in our region, particularly when compared to the national average. So for all of these reasons and more, that's why we're developing this campaign. We're helping, again, not to tell communities what to do, not to tell people what to do, but to say, first, let's have a really constructive conversation about this. And 2, how can we provide a greater array of housing options in communities throughout the entire region? In essence, providing opportunities to have a home that meets their needs. So not asking for anything really more than that. It's just, let's talk about it and let's talk about how this might work in your community. And so around that, we want to hold ourselves accountable. We really want to be able to demonstrate progress with this campaign. We've just launched it. We're just on the verge of starting those regional media buys. And this is what we're trying to achieve with all of our activities. We want to achieve these short-term goals. Again, changing that narrative. How can we help with the messaging? How can we be more intentional in the way that we communicate with each other? Can we cultivate champions and build up that level of statewide support? Because this is for all of Arizona. It's not just for Maricopa County. And those coalitions are really important, and it's important that they be diverse. We don't want to just talk to ourselves. We don't want to be in an echo chamber. We need to be talking with people with whom we might not always agree, because that's where the change happens. We need to be talking with folks with a different point of view and seek to understand their perspective and why they have that perspective. When neighbors are coming out in opposition of affordable housing, again, it's that term that can really trigger folks, but they may have very valid concerns. We need to address those, and we need to address those in a really constructive, transparent manner. We also need to be able to have that conversation in the first place. In doing so, we need to be able to equip people with tools. How do we talk about this? For example, referring to affordable rents and mortgages, talking about homes within reach, homes that meet our needs. It's changing the terminology, it's changing the words so we can have a better dialogue. Hopefully, if we can achieve those short-term goals, we can then achieve these long-term goals. We want to change the narrative. We want to change the way that we talk about housing. We want to have those coalitions of support. In essence, all of this drives to two things. One, having more attainable housing options in every single community. Again, not telling communities what that looks like necessarily, what they have to have, but we need more. We need more options, and we need to engage with communities and exploring what that looks like for them. We also want to have fewer barriers to stable housing. We want to be able to have people's incomes align better with the housing costs that they need to pay, and to have more stable communities as a result of that. So this is our brand, Home is Where It All Starts. And this is, again, really intentional. We conducted extensive community engagement and research to develop this, and it took us a long time because it needs to be something that's appealing, it needs to be something that's direct and something that's clear. And particularly with that image, it's really important in at least two ways. One, it's a keyhole. It's a keyhole, and it's helping us to unlock a brighter future for folks. And also the colors are very Arizona. We didn't want a campaign that wasn't grounded in who we are and where we are right now. It's very much a place-based campaign. And so we're excited about this, and we hope that you'll use it. We have different ways for you to get involved. This is what it looks like. So if you're featuring this in your newsletter, in an email, in a presentation at a meeting, these are some ways that we can be integrating the logo and the campaign, and really the whole look and feel of the campaign as well. And this is where you can go to get all of these materials, homeiswhereitallstarts.org. We encourage you, please go to the website. We're uploading more material to this on a very frequent basis. We have a toolkit that I'll share in just a moment. We have personal testimonials. We have lots of different ways that you can get involved. You'll find all of that material here. Again, homeiswhereitallstarts.org. And this is a toolkit that I just mentioned. We made this so that you can download the materials, you can adapt them. Again, it's really important to do that. You know your circles best. You know your constituents the best. So we want to give you the tools that you can use. You can take them, you can adapt them, you can put them into play. We encourage you to use these and to ask others to start using this as well. We have a variety of different tools that you can use there, and all of it, again, is very adaptable and can be used in a variety of different mediums. And this is why it's so important to have this conversation, to have a more constructive conversation. One, it's important. It really gets right to the root of who we are and how we live. And also, if you look at this and think about how positive it is. So home is all of these really incredibly important, meaningful things. Try flipping it to the other side though, and you can tell how emotionally charged this gets. Because for some people, they're speaking from a place of fear, and they're thinking about, I'm going to lose all of these really important things to me if those people move here, or if that kind of housing comes into my neighborhood and destroys my neighborhood. So it's emotionally charged, and we need to be able to level the playing field, to be able to offer data to folks, offer a new way of talking about this to folks, so that we can all see this common vision. This is what home is, and everyone needs access to a home just like that. And again, what that looks like in different communities, it'll vary, and that's okay, because people are different, communities are different. We need to have a constructive dialogue, because this does really strike to the root of who we are and how we live. So that is a QR code that you can use. It'll bring you right to our website, homeiswhereitallstarts.org. That is my direct phone number and my email address. Please feel free to reach out to me anytime. I'd love to continue this dialogue with you. It's an important one, and each of you can play a really direct and important, meaningful role in changing this conversation and helping people to have much more constructive conversations about housing, and how do we provide an array of housing options in all of our communities throughout the region, throughout the state. So that concludes my presentation. And Betsy, turn it back over to you, and happy for any dialogue that folks might have. Thank you. Betsy, you're on mute still? If folks have questions for us, if you'd like to drop it into the chat, or Betsy, I'm not sure how you might want to curate those.
Okay, I do have a question that I'll ask just to get us started. And this is relating to Home is Where It All Starts. Are there any communities or organizations that have begun working on this campaign, and are there some examples of what has happened?
Yes, no, that's great. So in terms of folks who are using it already, so First Place it is a great example, and it helps it to underscore the diversity of this issue. Everyone needs housing, right? It's not just one demographic or another. Particularly when we look at people who have disabilities, when we look at the data around that, people with disabilities tend to earn less, which makes housing even more out of reach for them. So First Place offers this really great model where they help people who have some kind of disability to be able to stabilize and then to be able to access housing. And so so they're using this, and we actually have a testimonial from Will. He was a client of First Place, and he's living on his own now. He's living independently, and he has housing that's within reach, which is incredibly important to him, being able to live independently and to live a stable life that's safe, and it gives him dignity and really that sense of purpose. We find that local governments, nonprofit agencies, everyone can kind of be a trusted messenger in this space, and people are using it in a variety of different ways. I know that at MAG, we're using social media a lot more now than we ever have before, and sending out those social media posts. It's visual, it's quick, it can get people's attention. And then also we've seen agencies bring speakers into their meetings. And so if we have our own meeting, then that's one thing. But if we can be invited into other people's meetings, and thank you for inviting us here tonight, then that opens up circles of influence that we don't have on our own. So we really appreciate any and all of those ways of engagement.
Have any city governments started using this?
The city governments were really eager for this. This was a hot topic, a very keen point of interest for our MAG Regional Council, and all of the mayors were very much in support, and they've really walked this journey with us. So they are using this to varying degrees, and we of course always encourage them to become more involved. We do have some local governments that have contributed financially as well, which is wonderful. We always appreciate that. And so we're thankful to them for helping to spread the word. And also Virginia G. Piper Charitable Trust has contributed with a $65,000 grant that is helping to subsidize those regional media buys. So we have a handful of local governments who have done that. And then we have the Piper Trust as well.
Okay, one final question for me. For instance, I live in the city of Mesa, and the city of Mesa is working on its general plan right now. How do we get that into the general plan? How do we spread that word?
Yes, absolutely. And Mason's doing some fantastic work in this space too, by the way. They're developing their balanced housing plan, which is looking really specifically at what price point do we need more housing. And they have some really great data and some really great community outreach around that. So hats off to Mesa. They're doing wonderful work in this space. And you're exactly right. A number of communities right now are working on their general plans, and community input is really important, particularly because not always, but often community input is not in support of affordable rents and mortgages. And so if folks can kind of present a different viewpoint and let the elected officials know that they are in support of having affordable rents and mortgages and being part of that process, you can go to city council meetings, you can submit public comment. Anything like that is really, really helpful, because it's tough when they're sitting on the dais and there's lots of people who are very angry, very emotional, saying in some cases some really terrible things, even to a point of personally attacking them verbally. Your support means the world. It really does, because it lets the elected officials know that there are additional voices to just what they hear in the room. And And it lets them know that there's a balanced perspective out there regarding affordable housing. So any way that you can contribute, you can call your elected official directly, you can send emails, you can submit comments online, you can attend the council meetings. Anything like that is always just really, really helpful.
Okay, we have a question from Rivko Knox, who did finally get in.
Oh, great.
Didn't have a chance to introduce Allison, but she at least got Allison to thinking about what should go in her introduction. So anyway, Rivko wants to know, how long must developers typically keep housing affordable when they get funding for low-income housing?
Mhm.
And
Alison, you wanna take that?
Sure. Yeah. The affordability requirements depend on some of the funding required. So LIHTC funding, it requires like 30 years of affordability, but at the 15-year mark, there is an option to sort of re-up, if you will, because there's a lot of rules when it comes to these kinds of sort of affordability, and what affordability means also changes over time. And it's all through the Federal Housing and Urban Development Administration that is using the sort of median area income as a benchmark for kind of what affordable should look like. And Amy did a great job of sort of laying out here's what it would look, here's what the sort of cost is, and here's what someone would need to earn. And those are based on sort of the sort of established area median incomes, and the sort of trying to get people out of that sort of burdened zone. And so I don't know if I answered your question fully, but it does depend. But for HUD LIHTC, the idea is that it should be forever, but it's not always forever.
Right. And that's increasingly an issue, actually, because the housing market, I mean, it's starting to plateau a little bit, but the prices that the money that landlords could get for their properties was just increasing exponentially. And it's pretty tempting, right? So as soon as they're out of that required period of needing to maintain lower rents, as soon as they get out of that, it's really tempting. It takes somebody who's really believing in the cause to not sell that property and then turn it over to regular market rate rent. And so there's a lot of areas of focus right now looking at how do we not just build affordable housing, but how do we preserve it? And so, for example, Maricopa County with Home Inc. has this fantastic program called Threshold, and it's an incentive program for landlords to continue maintaining those more affordable rents. And so they'll offer incentives like a signing bonus. If the unit is vacant for a month because they're between renters, then they might cover the rent. If there's damage, they'll help to cover that, because we need to keep the landlords whole too. I mean, they're trying to earn a living just like we are, and programs like Threshold can be really critical sometimes to helping landlords stay in that affordable housing space, because without it, we're just losing too many units as those leave that required period, and then they're being turned over to market rent, and it's out of reach for too many folks.
Yes. Okay, the next question, what action steps can ASU students, grad or undergrad, take toward more affordable and equitable housing? And I can relate to that. I marched in a redlining parade when I was about the age they are.
I mean, I think it's true. I mean, it's really hard to find places that are workable, and students are in the sort of space that in that sort of income bracket where it's really hard to find something that's sort of reasonable. And so I don't have there is this one little corner in downtown Phoenix that you should go to, because it is tough times. And I know that students have been very creative in when I was a student also, right? I had 4 roommates, and in a 2-bedroom apartment, but that's not how you want to that's not necessarily what we want to encourage, is that everybody has to become little in bunk beds. And so as far as, you know, sort of finding and being able to maintain rents, this is a problem too, because as Amy also showed too, just the rents kind of like tick up and tick up, which means that you're moving a lot and, you know, from year to year. And that can also be very difficult and disruptive and expensive, right? Every time you have to move all your things and you have to pay new deposits. And so it's a real, I mean, it's not just a hassle, it's a lot of work.
It is.
Disruption.
The ASU Action Nexus on homelessness actually has a shared housing program. And so maybe not 4 people in one, you know, in one apartment, but looking at how can we match up people who maybe could afford it if they, you know, if they did have one roommate maybe. And we've seen some really great models too, where particularly matching up older adults, maybe with college students, as long as their lifestyles align, which maybe they don't always, but looking at people whose lifestyles align and then being able to match them up. So for example, for an older adult who owns their home, but they can't afford to live on their own anymore, maybe because of the property taxes or just cost of living, things like that. If they can bring in a roommate, then often that's enough to make things pencil out. So really getting creative about how we envision this. And there's also more of a push around tiny homes, because people don't often need a big place, they just need a safe place that they can afford. And so looking at more units where they offer those smaller units and it's higher density, so financially it pencils out better for the developer. I think those are some really good options too.
What if these ASU students and grad students want to actually advocate and get involved, take action?
Yes.
What can they do to create more affordable and equitable housing?
We love interns. Please contact us. We'd love to work with you. And also if they really want to get involved and help, like with giving presentations and things like that, there's so many opportunities, I think, to really spread the word. And if somebody's really passionate about it and really wants to play a role, then we'd love to work with them. And Alison, I don't want to speak for you, but I imagine that you'd be really open to working with folks too.
Absolutely. And I mean, and ASU students, like all, you know, residents of the state, have the same sort of like option of like being able to sort of be present and be, you know, being able to attend meetings and just get educated about what the conversations are. Because I do think that they're not always at super convenient times, but you know, you have to, you know, like go on a random Tuesday to the community center or whatever, but it is like educational to even just hear what the conversations are. What people are concerned about. And I think Amy also said it really well to say that, like, you know, like this is not to say people do not have valid concerns. It's sort of a matter of just identifying what the concerns really are and what is fact and what is actually myth. And, you know, there's a lot of kind of mythology around, you know, what will happen when, and I think ultimately change is difficult. And one thing that I think ASU students and students and younger people in general have is like, I feel like they're in a constant, like they're already in constant change. They are very much more open to change. Like the longer we've been around, the more experiences we have, the harder change is for, I know this personally, you know. So I do feel like that's like one thing that I think that the perspective of youth really does bring this sort of the advantage of like being really open to change.
Definitely. Yeah, and just, I mean, just being civically engaged. We need more people to vote. We need more people to show up at community meetings, at council meetings. We need that voice, because the silent majority, if they're silent, then maybe people don't know that they're there. And we need folks to be active in a really constructive, respectful manner.
Right. And that leads to another question. And that is, how can we as citizens advocate for affordable housing? And let me give an example. In the city of Mesa, there was a city council meeting that was looking at some transitional housing. And there was a chance for the community to speak up. So what you do is you attend the meeting, you find out when the council meeting, when that item is going to be heard. you think about what you might want to say, and you get up and speak, because you can, when you come into the meeting, there is a sign-up sheet where you can be heard. And right now there is a group called the Valley Interfaith Project that is working on housing. And they had a large group at that meeting, and they had people giving the city council and the other attendees a chance to hear what a difference having affordable housing, having a chance to become housed after being homeless, meant to them in their lives. And it was a very moving meeting. And one of the council members, it was her district that this transitional housing was going to be located in. And she got up and gave a beautiful speech. And afterwards, she talked about how important it was that citizens had been there to share. And then you get to know who's on the council, and then you have even more impact.
Yes, absolutely. No, that is critically important. You know, one of the first kind of catalyzing experiences for me that highlighted the need for the campaign was when we're developing Pathways Home. That's our regional homelessness action plan for local and tribal government. So I was going around and presenting at various city and town council meetings. And I presented at a study session, and I was coming out of it, and I was leaving, and people were getting ready to go into the council meeting. Then I presented at the study session that preceded the council meeting, and there were organized protesters there. And I mean, they were well organized. They had matching t-shirts, signs, there were a lot of them, and they were angry, like, we don't want noise, we don't want pollution, we don't want crime. I thought, what's going on in here? And it was high-end luxury apartments. It wasn't even affordable. It was luxury apartments. And I just thought, oh my gosh, I mean, here we're wanting elected officials to stand up and say, we need this in our community. And yes, but we need to give them support. We need to give them cover. We need for them to hear, yes, we want this in our community, and not just see all the protesters. And it just highlighted the really tough spot that people are in. It's a tough position for the elected officials, because they want to serve their residents. And if they think my residents are angry, I shouldn't do this, then that could lead them to that decision. It's a tough spot for the people who are so angry, because I don't think they're doing it out of maliciousness or idleness. I think they're doing it because they're honestly upset. And we need to acknowledge their concerns. We need to address their concerns, and we need to have that constructive dialogue. And then it's absolutely tough for the people who need affordable rents and mortgages and don't have them, and they don't see any way of getting that affordable rent or mortgage. That's awful. People having to work 2-3 jobs and go without. And what are they going without? They're going without food. They're going without a lot of things that are really essential to having a good quality of life. So it's a tough spot for all of us, but if we can talk about it, we can learn from each other's experiences, we can learn each other's perspectives, and we can arrive at a better outcome because of that understanding.
Right. Alison, did you want to add to that?
I think Amy has said a lot of really, like really important things in here. And I do think that it's about kind of changing the conversation to it being a zero-sum game into something that is best for all communities. I think most communities really do want to have a future that, with thriving communities well into the future. They want their kids to be able to afford a home, their grandkids, you want your people near you. And so, like being able to sort of think about the benefits, really. I mean, I think, like I said before, I do think change is hard, and we've seen a lot of change in the Valley. I mean, if you've lived here for, any length of time, even in my, whatever, 30 years here or whatever, there's been a lot of change. And there will continue to be, honestly. And so it is it's a way of trying to kind of identify the sort of the benefits that we all have as a community, to sort of let people in, and like the benefits that we get from people not having to commute so far, not having to, having clean air, and having, like being able to like sort of really think about what is it going to look like here in Arizona 50 years from now, for for our kids, for our grandkids.
And I think it's really important to have that relational opportunity, both with
Mm.
talking to your city council members, the planning department. You get to know them, and pretty soon they are listening. And the
Mhm.
same thing with the groups that are in opposition. If you have a
Mhm.
personal story, that is really important.
Mhm.
And talking about the children,
Mhm.
you know, what happens when children don't have a safe, healthy place to live and
Mhm.
a good school to attend? So another question was about rent control and rent caps. Could you respond to that and how that fits in
I mean,
or
rent,
doesn't?
yeah, I mean, rent control is sort of technically illegal in the state of Arizona, like on a state level. The only the rent controls that we have are really these sort of affordability requirements and stuff are attached to specific funding for specific amounts of time or specific incentives. So there isn't one might say that like subsidized housing has some level of rent control because they're trying to like sort of maintain the affordability of these of a certain percentage of homes over a longer period of time. But broader speaking, we actually did we have a paper on the Morrison website that looks at kind of legal barriers and rent control or sort of modification or like limiting is in there. There is some evidence from like other cities that have implemented rent control that it doesn't necessarily get them where they need to be in terms of a long-term solution for maintaining affordability. It can have sort of backfire effects of having rent control means people don't have as much ability to move if they want to, and then you have kind of other things sort of happening, sort of that's an example of a policy where it's very you hear stories in San Francisco or like I've had this place since 1965 and I actually do a guy who had a rent control department there or whatever, and it's crazy. The costs in San Francisco are insane. But even the sort of rent controlled versions are pretty high. But once you get into one of those places, you're never leaving because you'll never be able to afford another place. So,
Okay.
but I don't think that most people would necessarily advocate for rent control across the board, other than to say that having some ability to sort of maintain this kind of affordable housing from using LIHTC credits and using sort of options that sort of lower the costs on the front end, sort of like even out the the costs over time. So, but I'm happy to hear, Amy, your perspective if you have one as well.
I don't have a position on that. I think so.
I think there are some less the things that can be done that are not as high impact as a full rent control, where you can look at over a period of time to create stability in a neighborhood. And we've been looking at that in our study, and we may have some ideas that will come in a future forum that we can talk about stability. I think that we have answered most of the questions that have come up. Penny, can you let me know if that's the case?
Betsy, yes, I don't have any questions. If there are any that Laura had, she probably sent it to you. So check your chat because I can't see
Right.
it yet. Okay.
Right.
All
The
right.
the final thing that I would have to say, and then I'll suggest that you each have a little final statement. Emailing your council members, the people that are dealing with this, is really important. The ones that are standing up and they're getting a lot of aggressive response from the neighborhood, give them some help. Let them know that you appreciate what they're doing. That's kind of my final idea. And Amy?
Absolutely. No, thanks so much. I really appreciate folks coming into this conversation. We need more people in this conversation. And in particular, I'd encourage you to share data and stories. The data is stark. I mean, we've lost 86% of our rents under $1,000 since 2011. So I mean, just think that 86%, it's almost impossible to find a rent now for less than $1,000. So, and I mean, I think back to my first apartment and it was 400 and I could handle that. And I was in social work at the time. So just times have changed and times are a lot tougher now. And it's important to connect with each other on a personal level. You know, there's a mayor that was talking to this issue, and his daughter had graduated from college, and she was smart and she was working really hard. And he was so sad because it looked like she'd have to move out of the state because she couldn't find an affordable rent anywhere near here. And you know, eventually she managed to figure it out, but it was roommates and you know, just making things happen. But it was hard. And how many people either move away or don't move here or are living here and they're really struggling and nobody hears them, nobody knows about them. We've got to share those stories, because if we can connect with each other as people, I think we can come up with more holistic solutions that are more sustainable in the long run. So I want to thank everyone for coming into this conversation. And please, if you have ideas, questions, anything like that, just want to connect, please reach out. I'd love to continue this dialogue with you. Thank you.
Oh.
And thank you so much for having us here tonight, Betsy.
Okay, Alison.
Yes, thank you very much for coming out tonight and spending some time with us. I'll tell you a little story that sort of hit home for me. And that is, my son, who's 12 now or whatever, when this was a couple of years ago, when he was 10, he was really upset. And I said, Greg, what is wrong? He says, I'm just really worried. And I'm saying, why are you worried? He says, I'm never going to be able to afford a house. And I was like, you're 10, like it's, this isn't should be on the top of your worry list just yet. But it's one of those things where it's in the sort of ether. People are worried. And even, my 10-year-old clearly, hears me talk a lot about research and housing, so there is that. But just the sort of idea that like this worry is on people's minds. And I know that, students that are coming out of school or they're moving here for the first time and getting their first job, like it's a lot to once upon a time it would not have been out of reach for a recent college grad to go and buy a place, but ultimately it's around sort of like how can we potentially provide more options for people to have like safe and affordable rents and mortgages. So I think that the more we have these sort of conversations, the more we sort of recognize that we're actually, we're all moving toward the same goal of having sort of thriving communities that are healthy and happy. That we are sort of as a state likely to find sort of common ground and be creative in the sort of solutions.
Well, I thank you very much for both of you for coming, and I've learned a lot, and let's spread the word.
Absolutely. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.